There are three categories of workflows currently available in use in HRWize: approval, continuous, and task. In this session, we're going to be looking at the approval workflow. Approval workflows are designed to follow an action whenever the system requires a submission to be approved or declined. Trigger types for approval workflows includes whenever an employee submits a timesheet or requests a training, when an employee's salary is changed into either the employee's change or the employee's benefit screen, when an expense claim has been submitted, or when a time-off request has been submitted. First, let's remind ourselves how we process a time-off request without the use of a workflow. So as an employee, we can go to Self-Service, My Request, and then Time Off. The time-off request is now submitted, and it is pending approval. Logging in as the manager, we're going to approve or decline the request. Here we can see the time-off request in the manager's workflow section. We can click here to go directly to the request in order to approve or decline it. Let's look at how to set up an approval workflow. To do this, we must go to Administration, HR, Workflows, and then Workflows again. Here we can see listed any workflows that we have created. We can click on the Add button to add and create a new workflow, but let's take a look at one that we have already created by clicking on the Edit action. We have given the workflow a name. Its category is selected as Approval, and type is Time Off. There are other types available such as Job Change, Mileage, Salary Change, Timesheets, and Time Tracking. You can choose from your time off types, but in this case, we chose Vacation. Here you can choose how the workflow applies, and if you want to trigger against employees in probation. You can choose to make this workflow applicable by department, sites, regions, job statuses, companies, business units, cost centers, and headcount classifications, both current and future. You can choose whether this workflow is only applicable for manager roles. In this case, we choose no. And finally, you can choose to make this workflow active or not. We can click on the Submit to save the changes, but for now, let's click on the Workflow Steps button and look at the workflow steps in our workflow. In this case, there's just one, but we can click on the Add button to add more if required. So let's click on the Edit action of this workflow step. So here we have given the workflow step a name. We can choose whether or not we want to notify only. In this field, there are many options available for you, but in this case, we chose Require Approval. Here we can decide whether or not any recipients can approve or not. Here we can choose what will happen if they decline the request or click on No. And here we identify who the recipient for the request will be. In this case, we're going to set up an employee's super approver. Now we are going to define what our notification message would look like. First, we created a message subject header. By clicking here, you can see a list of system fields that you can use in the workflow name, description, email subject, or message content. Here you can choose whether or not this message contains any sensitive content. If it does, a notification message will be sent to the recipient or recipients, linking to a secure page which will display the fields in the message content. The message subject will be delivered as is, including any potential sensitive content. Please note, this will only work if the recipient or recipients have an HRWize login in the system. Here we specify the workflow step order, and then define when should this step happen. In this case, 0 days after the submission date. And as you can see, there are many options you can choose from depending on the type of workflow you are creating. We haven't selected the escalation options here, but if you do choose to set any escalation options, this can be set up to send reminders to an assignee or recipient if an action hasn't been completed. As always, we can click on Submit to save the changes, but in this case, we're going to click on Cancel. Now that we have created our workflow, we are going to look at how we use this with a super approver. As we've seen typically, when an employee submits a request for time off, the manager is responsible to approve or decline the request. You can designate an employee as a super approver to approve requests made by one or more employees. The main difference between an approver and a super approver is that a super approver is exclusively used within a custom workflow, such as the workflow we've created here. First, let's take a look at how to set a super approver. As an administrator or HR level user, we can go to People and then Employees. Next, we choose the employee that we are going to make the super approver, and then we click on the Change Action. Scrolling down, we can see here we've selected the super approver option here. Please note, any access level user can be made as a super approver on the HRWize system, but this will not give the employee any access to any additional system modules or employee data. We can click on Submit to save the changes. Next, we're going to make Angela Martin the super approver for one of our employees, which in this case is Oscar Martinez. And then once again, you click on the Change Action. And at the bottom, we're going to select Angela Martin as the super approver for Oscar Martinez. And once again, we click on Submit to finish. Now we're going to log in as Oscar Martinez and book some time off. Now we log in as Angela Martin, the super approver, to process the request. Here in Angela's home screen, we can see a workflow notice telling Angela that there is a time off request from Oscar Martinez required for approval. We can click on this link to take us directly to the time off request that we can approve or decline it. Scrolling down, we can see the workflow progress showing us the steps involved in the workflow and what their statuses are. In this case, we're going to approve the request. And going back to the employees' view, who made the time off request, we can see that it has been approved. The super approver will receive an email notification. We can see here the message subject and the message content formatted with the system fields that we have added in our workflow previously. This time, we can click on the Action Now button and log in as a super approver. It leads you directly to the time of request to approve or to decline. At the bottom of the screen again, you can also see the workflow progress and the status of the steps. This time, we'll decline the request. Once again, we're going to log in as the employee and check the status of the request. And this time, we can see that the request has been declined. Now our workflow, with just one step, will not send a notification email to the employee telling them that the status of the request. So we'll return to our workflow and then click on the Change Workflow action, and we can see that the workflow has now two steps. Step 1 is to process the request, and Step 2 is to notify the employee the status of the request. So now, we'll click on the Edit action of Step 2 to see what it does. We gave this step a name, and we have chose Yes to notify only. The recipient is the employee, and here we have added our message subject and our message content, adding the request status as system fields, which will tell the employee if the request has been approved or declined. This time, the workflow step order is 2, and the workflow will trigger 0 days after the last action, being step 1, which is a super approver approving or declining the request. Click Submit to finish, or click on Cancel. So the next time an employee makes a time off request, the super approver will see a notice on their home screen for the time off request, and they will also receive a time off request email notification. When the request is approved or declined, the employee will receive an email notification saying that it has been approved or declined.